Okay. Well, I hope everyone had a good break, and I want to thank Senators Murray, Klobuchar, and Schatz for joining me. Well, today we learned that Republicans are trying to rebrand their big ugly bill. This bill is so wildly unpopular because it's at its very core, it's devastating to American communities, and Americans are already feeling it. So they're running away from it. So instead of trying to actually address what's hurting families, what do they want to do? Change the name. Hello? Changing the name isn't going to restore somebody's Medicaid. Changing the name isn't going to have those premiums not go up. Changing the name is not going to open the rural hospitals who are closing and laying off people. So it shows what a bubble they're in. And you know, the fact that Donald Trump says a big, beautiful bill is cutting Medicaid is showing the American people just what his values are. And they're not the American people's values. So Americans know damn well that these cuts to Medicaid and to ACA, they are big, but they certainly ain't beautiful. The fact that Republicans think that Medicaid cuts are beautiful, as I said, reveals who they are to the American people. And about the average American, Donald Trump doesn't give a damn. He's in his own little bubble. He talks to his billionaire friends. They make him happy when they say, "Thanks, Donald, you're doing a great job. You're giving me a tax break." So he's the only one who would really label such a horrible bill as beautiful. Let's be clear, this isn't a branding problem. Okay? We each spent a month at home. I did close to 20 meetings on health care, mainly in upstate Republican districts and areas. And you heard how bad it was. I went to the state fair, which is a pretty Republican operation. I had a great time. I saw the butter sculpture. I got to drink chocolate milk, which is the one time a year my wife will let me drink it. But at the state fair, it was clear. So let me show you this chart. This is a different chart. Where's the chart on the polling? You don't have that? Okay, well, this chart is the trade war. The price of goods is up 40% for leather products, 7% for pressed produce, 12% for cars, 18% for consumers and electronics. Can we get the polling chart? Okay, thank you. So, here are the polling data, which we'll show in a chart. Pew Research, 46% disapprove of this big, beautiful bill, 32% approve. Navigator, 52% unfavorable, 33% favorable. CNN, 61% oppose, 39% approve of the big, beautiful bill. And it's interesting, almost all Democrats oppose it, but depending on the poll, 2/3 to 3/4 of independents oppose it, and a good chunk of Republicans oppose it, up to 40% in one poll, as I understand it. So on the shutdown, this month Republicans will face their greatest test under the Trump administration. Will they work in a common-sense, bipartisan way to keep the government open? The only way to avoid a shutdown is to work in a bipartisan way. You need Democrats and Republicans with a bill that gets both parties' support in the Senate. Senate Democrats, we've shown firsthand that we're willing to work with them in a bipartisan way to keep our government open by advancing the bipartisan appropriation bills, which Patty will talk about. However, as we near the funding deadline, Republicans are once again threatening to go at it alone, heading our country towards a shutdown and making the health care crisis even worse. With Trump's attempt of so-called pocket rescissions, Republicans are prioritizing chaos over governing, partisanship over partnership, and their own power over the American people. For weeks now, Leader Jeffries and I, and we're working on the same page, we talk all the time, just talked to him last night again, we've written to the Republican leaders, asking them to meet us to start the negotiation process. We did that in early August. We didn't hear from them. Weeks later, we wrote a letter asking them to meet with us to start negotiating. Again, nothing again. Crickets. We heard nothing. Time is short. Republicans need to stop trying this go-at-it-alone approach. They did that with the big, beautiful bill. Look how that's working out for them. Look how that's working out for them. Chart's not here yet. Okay. We don't want a shutdown. We want bipartisan negotiations and a bipartisan bill. If Republicans want to keep the government open, they got to work with us. We need some action from Republican leaders showing that they're serious, that they want to prevent a shutdown by working with us. We Democrats are ready to get to work.
During a press conference on Wednesday, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat, New York, sharply criticized Republicans for failing to respond to multiple offers made by Democrats to negotiate a spending bill as the government nears a potential shutdown. Schumer accused Republicans of prioritizing partisanship over effective governance, making it clear that their refusal to engage in talks was pushing the country closer to a crisis. According to Schumer, the GOP's decision to ignore Democrats' repeated calls for negotiations had significant consequences for both the functioning of the government and for key areas of public life, particularly health care. Schumer highlighted that instead of taking meaningful steps toward addressing the looming shutdown, Republicans seemed determined to push forward with their own partisan agenda. He pointed out that while Democrats had been proactive in seeking bipartisan solutions, the Republican leadership had shown no signs of willingness to work collaboratively. Despite Democrats' attempts to initiate discussions, including sending letters to Republican leaders in early August and again later in the month, Schumer said that their efforts had been met with silence. Crickets, Schumer said, emphasizing the lack of response from GOP leaders. He made it clear that the failure to negotiate was not just about politics, it was about real-life consequences for the American people. Schumer criticized the Republicans' proposed bill, which he referred to as the Big Beautiful Bill, for being wildly unpopular with the public. He underscored that the bill had not only been met with overwhelming disapproval from Democrats, but also from a significant portion of independents and even Republicans. Schumer pointed to several polls, including ones from Pew Research, Navigator, and CNN, which all showed high levels of disapproval from voters across the political spectrum. In some cases, up to 40% of Republicans opposed the bill, demonstrating that the GOP's approach was failing to win over even their own base. Schumer used his visits to various districts as evidence that the bill's unpopularity was not limited to Democratic strongholds. He described his experiences during a recent trip to a state fair in a more conservative district, where the public sentiment was clearly against the bill. He recalled meeting with constituents who expressed frustration over the cuts to Medicaid and the rising costs of healthcare premiums, issues that were directly tied to the bill's provisions. Schumer argued that while Republicans were focused on pushing through legislation that was out of touch with the needs of average Americans, Democrats were actively listening to the concerns of their constituents and seeking ways to work across the aisle to address those issues. The looming government shutdown, Schumer warned, would only worsen the situation for the American public, particularly in areas such as health care. The speaker pointed out that the Republican approach to health care, which included slashing Medicaid and other critical services, would directly harm millions of Americans who were already struggling. Schumer argued that the failure to reach a bipartisan agreement would not only bring about a government shutdown but also exacerbate the health care crisis that many Americans were already feeling. He accused Republicans of putting their party's interests above the well-being of the public and of ignoring the real-world impacts of their actions. Schumer also criticized President Trump's framing of the bill, referring to it as a big, beautiful bill, despite its widely known flaws and unpopularity. Schumer argued that Trump's characterization was an attempt to downplay the negative consequences of the bill and distract from its true effects. He suggested that Trump's position was a reflection of his disconnection from the struggles of ordinary Americans, as the president continued to cater to the interests of billionaires and special interests. Schumer stated that Trump's inability to understand the needs of the American people was evident in his failure to acknowledge the widespread opposition to the bill. As the funding deadline neared, Schumer called for Republicans to stop trying to go it alone and work with Democrats to find a compromise. He warned that if Republicans continued to refuse to negotiate in good faith, they risked not only a shutdown but also further damage to the country's healthcare system and other vital services. Schumer expressed his frustration with the GOP's approach, stating that it was time for them to put the interests of the American people first, instead of prioritizing partisan power struggles. He emphasized that Democrats were ready and willing to negotiate in a bipartisan manner, but the ball was now in Republicans' court. Schumer concluded by stressing the importance of bipartisan cooperation and called for swift action to prevent a shutdown. He reiterated that time was running out and that if Republicans were serious about keeping the government open, they needed to engage with Democrats in meaningful negotiations. He emphasized that the only way forward was through collaboration, and it was essential that both parties put aside their differences for the greater good of the nation.